When he rolls up his sleeves, he ain't just putting on the ritz. God is an awesome God. There's thunder in his footsteps and lightning in his fists. God is an awesome God. And the Lord, he wasn't joking when he kicked him out of Eden. It wasn't for no reason that he shed his blood. The turn is very soon, and so you better be believing that our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. And when the sky is starless in the void of the night, our God is an awesome God. He spoke into the darkness and created the light. Our God is an awesome God. The judgment and wrath He poured out on Sodom, His mercy and grace He gave us at the cross. A hope that we have not too quickly forgotten. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God.
Hello everybody, welcome to worship. We're going to get started in just a moment, but just to remind you, if there's ever anything you'd like to see during this service, during this online service, that I can add in, please just reach out and let me know. Please join me now in our Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the rose.
The final verse in the book of Judges says this: "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Now there's a lot of bad stuff going down in Judges, so it seems like the author is implying here that the people of Israel need a king. Except then we get to the story of the first king of Israel, and something is off. I'm going to be reading today starting in 1 Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." So it would seem that the people do need a king, and according to God, well, God wants to be their king, but they've rejected God as their king. And they've been doing it from the day that God brought them up out of Egypt. So forsaking God and serving other gods. And so this request of theirs is nothing out of the ordinary. And for whatever reason, well, God is going to let them have free will. God is going to let them get what they want, even if it is not in their best interest. God is going to let them do what is right in their own eyes. But before they take a king for themselves, God is going to warn them. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." So again and again, Samuel warns the people that should they choose a king, that king is going to take and take and take from them. The implication, the king will seize something he wants, and then he will take it. But the people fail to heed the warning. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." And the very next chapter introduces us to the first king, Saul. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Now, a quick question. How tall or short were Adam and Eve? Or Cain and Abel? Or what about Noah or Abraham or Joseph or Moses? How tall were any of them? Or how handsome or beautiful were any of them? Like, what do we actually know about what they looked like? Because my mind is drawing a blank. Because the Bible rarely tells us about what someone looks like. But for some reason, the biblical author stops here to tell us two things. Saul is handsome and Saul is tall. But why? Why does the author tell us this? Let's read a little more. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys." So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area around Shalisha, but they did not find them. They went on into the district of Shalim, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed through the territory of Benjamin, but they did not find them. When they reached the district of Zuph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, "Come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us." But the servant replied, "Look, in this town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there now. Perhaps he will tell us what way to take." Saul said to his servant, "If we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" The servant answered him again. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so that he will tell us what way to take." And then the author, he puts a little side note in here. He says, "Formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, 'Come, let us go to the seer,' because the prophet of today used to be called a seer." Now let's pause real quick. Why does the author add in this little note? And he says, formerly we called them seers, not prophets. Okay, but then why not just call Samuel a prophet in this story and skip this whole side note? What's so important about calling him a seer in this story? Right? A seer, or one who sees. For some reason, the author wants us to know Saul is handsome and tall, and the author also wants us to pay attention to whatever Samuel the seer sees. So with that in mind, let us keep reading. "Good," Saul said to his servant. "Come, let's go." So they set out for the town where the man of God was. As they were going up the hill to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water, and they asked them, "Is the seer here?" "He is," they answered. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now, he has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Go up now, you should find him about this time." They went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel, coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. "About this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people of Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me." Okay, here we go. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, "Would you please tell me where the seer's house is?" "I am the seer," Samuel replied. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me, and in the morning I will send you on your way and will tell you all that is in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line?" Saul answered, "But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me?" Okay, so Saul reveals to us at the very end here that his clan is the least of the clans from the smallest of the tribes of Israel. So he's wondering, and what we should be wondering is, "Why are you so about me?" But when Samuel looks at Saul, he doesn't see a man from the least of the clans among the smallest of the tribes. Instead, what Samuel the seer sees when he looks at Saul is a handsome young man who is a head taller than anyone else. What Samuel the seer sees is the obvious choice for the new king, the man to whom all the desire of Israel is turned towards. So on the one hand, you could say, yeah, but God chose Saul. But did God choose Saul? Was Saul God's choice, or was Saul the people's choice? Did God just give the people what they wanted? A human king, even though it would be bad for them? And did God just give the people who they wanted? A handsome, tall, young man whom all Israel desired, even though he would be a bad king for them. But let's jump ahead and let's read one more part of this story. This is when Saul is first made king. Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord of Mizpah and said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God who saves you out of all your disasters and calamities. And you have said, 'No, appoint a king over us.' So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies." They ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Now, as we read this, we might once again say, hey, God chose Saul. And if we know where Saul's story is headed, well, Saul won't end up being God's choice for king for very long. So that should cause us to ask, was Saul ever God's choice? And while we're wrestling with that question, we should then be asking, okay, well, if Saul wasn't God's choice, well, do we think he was the people's choice? And as we ask that, well, we can't help but read those final lines a little differently. All right, so as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. And Samuel said, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people. Long live the king!" And so let's take a moment and connect what we just read to what we read last week. So this story is about humans thinking they know what is best. This story is about humans doing what is right in their own eyes. Or to put it another way, the humans are seeing and determining what is good, and then they are doing or choosing or taking it. Saul is young and handsome and tall, and therefore Saul will make a good king. The people see Saul, and they take Saul, and they make him their king. They see and they take. It's almost like the same story as when Adam and Eve see the fruit. They determine it is good, and then they take it and eat of it. And in both stories, well, God just lets them do it. God lets them have and do whatever they want. And God tries to warn them, but God won't step in and force them to obey. God lets them choose. And you know what? These stories are sort of similar, but they're not the same story. Except, there's this one weird detail that we maybe missed at the end of our story. Let me read the end to you again. When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But When they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies." Wait, what? Saul was hiding? Like in the supplies and the baggage? Okay, say it with me now. What is going on here? Now, can you think of another story in the Bible where someone hides? How about the story of human and life? Oh, sorry, you know it as the story of Adam and Eve, but that is what their names mean, human and life. Now, what's going on here is the story of human and life is not just a story about Adam and Eve. It is a story about humans and life. The story of the Garden of Eden and the two trees, it's not a story about the first two humans to ever walk the earth. This story is about all humans. Right? As we just saw, this story of the two trees is about the people of Israel failing to heed the warnings of God and ultimately doing whatever was good in their own eyes. The people of Israel saw that the man named Saul was good, and they took him and made him their king. But the story of the two trees is also about Abraham and Sarah and their slave Hagar. So God has promised Abraham children, but Sarah is barren. And as Sarah gets older, she tells Moses to sleep with her servant so that she can have children. And the text says, "And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai," which is calling back to when God said to Adam, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree." And then Abraham's story goes on. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian and gave her to Abram her husband as a wife. So she took Hagar and gave her to Abram. Eve took the fruit of the tree and gave some to her husband. It's the same story. Hagar has become the fruit. And how did Abraham respond? "And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived." Right? No fuss from Abraham. And earlier there was no fuss from Adam. They just did as they were told. They listened to the wrong voice. And after Hagar conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. So suddenly Hagar is not the fruit. Now Hagar is in the role of Adam and Eve. Suddenly Hagar is the one looking. And Hagar is realizing that she now has the power since she was able to get pregnant. And so she decides it is good for her to look with contempt on Sarah. But then Sarah jumps back into the story and complains to Abraham. And Abraham says, "Your servant is in your hands. Do to her what is good in your eyes." And now Sarah is listening to her own voice and seeing with her own eyes, and she determines it will be good to mistreat Hagar. And so Hagar flees out into the wilderness, which is exactly where Adam and Eve were banished to when they had to leave the garden. It's the same story. Or how about Cain and Abel? In the story, God tells Cain that sin is crouching at his door. So sin here is being talked about as if it is an animal crouching at his door, ready to pounce. And this animal wants to tempt Cain to do something he shouldn't do. It's the same story. Or just after Cain kills his brother, God shows up and says, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And after Adam ate the apple, God shows up and says, "Where are you? Where is Abel? Where are you?" And then to Cain, God says, "What have you done?" And to Eve, God says, "What is this that you have done? What have you done and what have you done?" It's the same story. And then God gives out curses, and then God banishes them from the land. Which story am I talking about? Both of them, because they are the same story. The story about human and life and the two trees is not about the first two humans to ever walk the earth. The story about human and life is about all humans. The story of human and life and the two trees, it's a story about humans failing to listen to the voice of God. And humans making sometimes stupid mistakes, sometimes horrible mistakes, sometimes deadly mistakes, all because we reject God as our king, and we refuse to listen to the voice of God. It's Samuel and Israel choosing Saul, who one day will fail them as a leader. And it is a story about humans trying to step in and take God's place, and humans trying to sit on the throne that belongs to God and God alone. We want to make determinations and decisions about what is good and what is not good. It is Noah choosing which sons to bless and which sons to curse, a job that before then was only done by God. It's God saying to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," and then Pharaoh responding, "No, they're my people, they're my slaves, and I will do with them as I please." And the story is not just about other characters and people in the Bible. The story is about all humans. And so this story is about you and me. The story is about how we question what God said, and we question whether God is right or not. We question whether God truly has our best interests at heart. We're told that knowing what is good and what is not good is off limits to us, and we think, oh, maybe that's something God is holding out on me. Right? God clearly told me to avoid this, but I know better than God. And the story is about how we face temptations from all directions. There's some force outside of us twisting words and tempting us. And then there's also some force inside of us causing our desires to be so loud as to drown out the voice of God. And the story about how we see something and we desire it, well, we identify it as good and we take it. It's the story of affairs and overeating and drugs and shoplifting and backstabbing friends just to get a promotion. And the story is about how we do something wrong and then suddenly our eyes are opened. In the moment, we're consumed by hatred and fear or lust or some other powerful emotion that we allow to rule over us for that moment. And then that moment is over and that emotion begins to subside and our heads start to clear and suddenly our eyes are opened and we're filled with regret. We're exposed. We feel naked and vulnerable. We feel shame. We want to hide our face and escape the embarrassment or escape the wrath of whomever we harmed. Or we want to hide under the covers and escape from the disappointing looks our parents will give us. We want to shift the focus away from ourselves. And so we try to blame others or we try to change the subject. We try whatever we think is good to try in that moment. Because facing that moment all exposed and naked is not good. This story is our story. It is the story that all of us have lived hundreds and thousands of times. It's a story about you failing to listen to the voice of God. It's a story about me trying to sit on God's throne. It is a story about us eating from all of those trees that God tells us not to eat from. And then by eating those trees, we miss out on the tree of life. It is a story, but all of these are stories in which we are meant to see ourselves. The character portraits found in these narratives are of humans just like you and me. We are flawed humans just like them. We can learn about ourselves from them. As the BibleProject says, these are stories of humans wrestling with the same serious evil that all humanity has been wrestling with from the beginning of time, and the same serious evil that all humanity will be wrestling with until the end of this age. And these are realistic narrative portraits of the human condition. Right? So things are difficult. Things are not working out the way I wanted them to. God said this was going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And sometimes you got to take things into your own hands. Right? Like who hasn't lived that story hundreds of times? Right? So sometimes you think you need to sleep with your slave in order to get that son that was promised to you, even if it comes at the expense of that slave. Or sometimes you think you need to spend less time with your family so that you can spend more time at work, so that you can impress your boss and get that promotion, so that you can make more money and get the bigger house. Because you thought you had this deal with God where you would be faithful and come to church and God then would give you whatever you wanted. And God hasn't really delivered on his side of the deal yet. And so maybe you need to help God to make it happen, even if it comes at the expense of your family. These stories remind us again and again of our failures. But there's good news. Because this story is about us, it means that we have a choice. Right? The choice was not made for us 4,000 or however many years ago by the first two humans to ever walk the earth, because this is a story about all humans. And so all humans get the choice between two trees, the choice between two voices, the choice between life and death. God offers this choice to everyone, and God never stops offering it. Cain messed up with his offering, and God did not look with favor on it. But then God gives him another chance, telling him, hey, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? And then again and again and again, God asks Pharaoh to let God's people go, giving Pharaoh chance after chance after chance to make the right decision and get off God's throne. And to the people of Israel, well, despite all that they had done wrong, and despite all that they would do wrong, the words of Moses were meant to stick with them, speaking to them day after day, moment after moment. I have set before you life and good, death and evil. Now choose life. Right? Love God and obey his voice and hold fast to him. So the good news is that every day and every moment, we have a choice. But the good news is also that even when we fail, even when we make the wrong choice, even when we reject God's voice, God is still good to us. After Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God made garments of skin for them. After Cain killed Abel, well, God gave Cain a mark to protect him. After Abraham and Sarah took advantage of Hagar, well, God protected and took care of Hagar and her son, and God also gave Abraham and Sarah the son that God had promised to give them. Even with the Israelites, who rejected God as their king, after the people's choice, Saul, didn't work out too well, next they got God's choice, David. And even further down the line, Jesus would show up and sit on the throne. But, despite God's goodness, after reading all these stories of humans failing in the Bible, and after experiencing so much failure ourselves, we recognize pretty quickly that while we might have a choice, choosing the right tree and the right voice is not easy. Because there's this problem of sin. There is this force outside of us twisting words and tempting us, and there's this force inside of us ramping up the volume of our desires and emotions to drown out the voice of God and our rational thoughts. And so because of this problem of sin, we all fall short of the glory of God. And we'll get more into that in a few weeks. And spoiler alert, right? The answer is Jesus, of course. When it comes to our struggle against sin, and when it comes to our failures and our lack of holiness and our lack of righteousness, when it comes to all of the damage that we do to ourselves and others into this world, the answer is Jesus. We need to be made new, a new creation. We need a new heart. And the answer is Jesus. And yet, even before Jesus came, God was offering people a choice. And so even as we wait patiently for Jesus to work on us and to work on our hearts, even as we wait patiently for Jesus to make us new, we still have a choice set before us. We have a choice between two trees. We have a choice between two voices that we can listen to. We have a choice between life and death, between God's good and our good. We have a choice about who sits on the throne of our lives. So, do we do what is right in our own eyes, or do we have a king?
I want Jesus to walk with me.
is sitting on the throne at the center of your life? Right? Whose voice have you been listening to? What choice have you been making? And what choice will you make next? May you, as you read your Bible, may you find yourself in its narratives and stories and parables and poems. May you see yourself in the people. And may you see God's love for you and God's love for them. May you not do what is right in your own eyes, but instead turn your eyes to Jesus and do as he says. And in doing so, may you, may me, may all of us find life and find it to the full. Amen.
And I believe you when you say your hand will guide my every way. Will I receive the words you say every moment, every day? And I will walk by faith even when I cannot see. Well, because this broken road, the pressure will for me. Will help me to rid my endless fears. You've been so faithful for all my years. With one breath you make me new. Your grace covers all I do. And I will walk by faith, even when I cannot see. But because this broken road, the pressure will for me. Well, I'm broken, but I still see your face. Well, you've spoken, pouring your words of grace. And I will walk by faith, even when I cannot see. Well, because